Hey there and welcome to the channel. My name's Dominic, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at a few clips that you guys have sent in for me to color grade. In this video I'll show you my approach to color grading, since these clips range from all sorts of different types of cameras and picture profiles and lighting scenarios. Let's jump in. So our first clip here is from Jake. I'll put his Instagram tag up on the screen. In fact, I'll put everyone's up on the screen, even if I don't mention them when we get to their clips in the video. All right, so I know for a fact this was shot on a Sony a7S III. I'm gonna assume this is S-Log3, and I always shoot all my footage on the same camera and the same profile. So I'll walk you through my process of how I would grade a clip like this if it were my own. So each set of clips that I have are all from the same camera respectively. So what I'm gonna do is create an adjustment layer for each section and grade it as if I were grading the entire project that was shot in that camera. So for this first sequence, I'm gonna go ahead and create a new adjustment layer. I'm gonna drag that on top of just these first ones here. Since I'm pretty sure this was shot in S-Log3, I'm gonna go ahead and drop in my S-Log3 LUT. And a lot of you ask about my color grading process and what kind of LUTs I use. The LUTs that I've been using since about December of 2021 are these Phantom LUTs by Joel. I can't think of his last name. Joel Famularo. Joel has made some of the best LUTs I've ever seen, especially for Sony cameras. You can see he also makes them here for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K and 6K, as well as the Arri Alexa and Amira. I purchased the Sony LUTs. I bought the Film Look Pack and the Arri Look Pack. Both of them incredible. I mostly use the Arri Look Pack because the skin tones and the colors that this LUT reproduces are second to none. I have tried to dial in my own custom LUT to look somewhat like it, and I cannot get close to the results that this LUT has. So check him out, buy all of these LUTs, they're incredible, and I'll show you how I utilize them in my videos. So back to Premiere. On my adjustment layer, I'm gonna go ahead and add one of Joel's LUTs. I love the Utopia LUT. Utopia adds a little bit of blue to the shadows and kind of keeps the midtones and the highlights more neutral, but that blue really makes it feel kind of cinematic. So we'll go ahead and use that LUT. You can see here it looks very, very heavy on our clip. So what I do after I apply the look is I go into the clip itself and start dialing in the exposure as well as the white balance. Click on the clip. We'll go ahead and start with the white balance. What I'm looking at here is her dress. I want to try and dial that in and make it look as realistic and white as possible. Although since this is on the shadow side, we got the sun coming from the right side of the screen here. Her dress, since it's in the shadow, will be picking up a bit of blue from the sky. So it's okay if this leans a little bit towards blue, and that's kind of how I like it. So we'll just keep kind of dialing this in and making it look good. All right, so just with that correction, you're really separating her skin tones from the dress and all the other colors, because now our blue sky stands out, her dress really pops, and her skin tone is really popping compared to this, where everything is just warm across the board. So we're gonna warm things up in a minute, but I like to start by creating a really neutral look in the beginning, and then we can start dialing in our kind of creative look towards the end once we kind of have our baseline set. Then we kind of know where we're going from there. All right, so we got this set. Her skin tones are looking a little intense. First, let's recover some of these highlights. We'll grab our exposure, bring this down a bit so we can recover some of that. And then we'll go to our shadows, bring these up a bit. You can see now we're looking a little too cool, which we'll correct that shortly. Kind of bring these shadows up a bit. We'll come down to our curves. I really want to make this feel light and airy, and I want it to feel punchy, but not too much. So the curves here really help you just dial in what part of the image you want to boost. And in this case, I really want to bring her skin tones up a bit to make them pop. We'll go back to our white balance. Before, after. All right, now we're gonna introduce some of those warm tones that I said we would once we got our image more balanced. So we're gonna go over here to the creative tab, and under the highlights, we're gonna kind of just push this up into the orangish, reddish kind of look. This really allows you to take control of the image and push it in a direction that you want instead of just working with the already really warm image. Once we have the warmth that we like, we can take control of this even by using the tint here. On the right, we've got our highlights, and on the left, we've got our shadows. If I were to pull this all the way down to the shadows, it's filling the entire image with this warmth that we've applied. But if I pull it up this way, it removes the warmth because we've got nothing in our shadows, so this is all just remaining neutral. So this allows us to define what portion of the image we want to be affected by the highlight tint and what portion of the image we want to be affected by this shadow tint. Since we have nothing in the shadows, we can just kind of dial this in to what parts of the highlights we want. So if we go somewhere around there, it's hard to see when you're just looking at the image, so toggling things on and off really helps you see how far you've pushed the image. So in doing this, we still have a nice warm image, but we still maintain the separation between her skin tones and the dress and the background compared to our base image where everything kind of just blends all together. Moving on to our second clip here, I'm gonna go ahead and turn our adjustment layer back on. And you can see this is prime example of why LUTs aren't an end-all be-all. They're great for a starting point and they're great for continuity between your clips, but you're always gonna have to make adjustments and have knowledge in how to make the correct adjustments on your clip to make everything feel cohesive and look the way you want it to. We're gonna evaluate up front and see what we need to do to this image to make it match our first image. Clearly it's too dark, there's a lot of contrast, and it's got a very green and warmish tint to the entire thing. So let's dive in and see how we can make these two clips match. Let's begin by bringing our exposure down. Our sunset in the back is not entirely blown out. Obviously the sun is, but these parts on the sides are not, so we'll kind of bring this down and looking over here at our waveform to see that we're saving that data, and then we'll kind of push our shadows up a bit. Our subject here is in the shadows and they're the star of the show, so it's okay to bring this up in this situation. Mind you, this is Sony S-Log3 10-bit 422 footage, so I have the ability to push it pretty far before it starts falling apart. If this were 8-bit footage, you probably couldn't push it like this, but I've got some 8-bit clips down the road, so we'll take a look at those when we get there. We'll lower our contrast a little bit. And I'm doing the exposure first so I can get a better look at the colors to see what we need to do in terms of white balance. All right, we'll leave it right there for now, and then we'll dial the rest in with our curves shortly. Let's get our white balance dialed in. You can see we're getting really nice separation once again between the white of her dress and the background, and all of these different colors are starting to pop compared to where we started. Let's go into our curves and start dialing this in a bit. See how the curves are really allowing us to put the focus on our subject who's up near us in the shadows with this harsh light behind. And adding a curve like this, it allows us to take control of the horizon there and kind of pull it down a little bit to put more focus on our subject. We'll go ahead and remove a little bit more of this warmth. All right, that's looking good. We'll go into the creative tab and we're gonna do the same thing with our highlights to really bring back the vibrance and the warmth from the sun that we want. Check some before and after. So I think this shot is pretty much done. Moving on to our next clip. This one was submitted by Sam. This was shot on a Sony A6100, I believe. I could be wrong. some Sony Alpha 6000 series camera. So this is an APS-C size sensor, so not as great in low light. And I know this footage was shot in 1080p at 60 frames per second in 8-bit 420. So this footage won't allow me to push it as far, but I'll show you some things we can do to keep it subtle, yet still alter the image and get the look that we want. So we'll go ahead and grab another adjustment layer. These 3 clips are all shot on the same camera. So let's jump in and see what we can do to this 8-bit footage to make it look nice. So we'll go into our adjustment layer, we'll go up to our basic correction and start dialing in some things. So we'll bump up our contrast, bring this down. I'm really gonna try and save our highlights, and we'll crush the blacks a little bit because that's all right. But I really wanna try and save our highlights if we can, because nothing looks more amateur than absolutely blown out highlights. Obviously it's okay if you've got some clipping in the background like this, but we'll try and save them, especially with this 8-bit footage, and especially since it's not clipped to begin with. We'll just try and retain that. Since we have a basic correction kind of done to these clips to get a better idea of what they look like, let's go ahead and start applying some more creative looks to this grade. Let's jump into our curves, start playing with this. I'm gonna go for more of a moody kind of vibe. Really looking at just like his skin. I wanna make that look rich, but still kind of pop. So I'm gonna start pushing some colors around. I don't love the shade of his pink shirt, or is that a red shirt? I can't tell. Maybe I'm colorblind. That would not be good. We'll grab the red, kind of pull it down a little bit. You can see since I pulled the red, it's kind of messed up our skin tones. So we'll grab our orange, pull that back a little bit. What I like to do for the grass is grab our yellow, kind of pull it up towards orange a little bit, and then grab our deep green, put another point here, grab our deep green and pull it down. So it adds a lot of variation within the grass and it feels kind of rich and deep. So there we went from that to this. We'll grab our blue, push it more towards teal. So it's kind of adjusting his gloves. So we'll pull these down into the red. So now we'll kind of mess with the saturation. I kind of want desaturated greens and blues. And keep our reds and oranges and skin tones up a bit. So we'll pull our greens down a bit. And being 8-bit footage, it still looks like it's holding up because we haven't pushed anything too far. Saturation is all right to mess with a bit. Hue versus hue is where you gotta be careful, but hue versus luma is where you gotta be really careful with 8-bit footage, because if you push it too far, it creates a lot of really weird artifacts and it doesn't look good. I want to introduce a little bit of blue into the shadows. So we'll go over to our creative tab, and just like we added warmth to the highlights in the earlier shots, we'll go ahead and add a little bit of like this kind of teal greenish color. And like I described earlier with the tint balance, this allows you to kind of dial in where this blue sits in the shadows. So I don't want it to affect the shadows of his skin tones too much. Pull it down and then slowly introduce it. Just kind of like that. See a little before and after. You can see that really pulls out the color in like the wood back here and the dirt. Let's see it before and after. That's looking pretty good. I want to add a little bit more saturation even to his red shirt. I really want to make it pop. All right, this clip is pretty well exposed and the white balance is pretty good, so I'm not going to touch the clip since we have our look dialed in. One last thing I want to do is go back to our creative tab and add a little bit of warmth into our highlights to just kind of really push the look and create more separation. let's move on to our second clip in the same sequence. So you can see our before and after. We've added this look, and it's a bit intense on this clip, so we'll go down to our clip, start making some slight adjustments. Go ahead and bring our shadows up. Also keep an eye over here. It looks like we're clipping, so we'll kind of bring our overall exposure down, our shadows up. Come to our curves. Curves are always going to allow you to really dial in the contrast and look of your image because it offers so much flexibility for specific parts. All right, moving on to the third clip. Once you dial in the look on the adjustment layer for the entire piece, it's really easy to just correct each individual clip if they're all shot in somewhat similar lighting. So for this final clip, it's a little bit warmer out and a little bit too contrasty once again. So we'll come over here to our basic correction, pull our shadows up a bit. I also might cool it off slightly just to bring some of that oversaturation out of his legs there. Whenever you apply contrast, it always pushes saturation into the image as well. So be sure if you adjust one of those two, you take a look at the other one and see if you can pull it back or bring it up a little bit. All right, let's go into our curves and dial this in a little bit. These next set of clips are interesting because they're all shot with no picture profile. So these are all shot in the Sony a7 III in 8-bit, 420, 120 frames per second, 1080p. So being 8-bit footage and no picture profile, it's an interesting spot because there's a lot of data there, but you can't push it too far because, especially with the contrast, because you can't really pull the shadows up too much. Otherwise you'll see a lot of noise and artifacts. And likewise with the highlights, you can't really pull that back too much because when you're shooting without a picture profile, what's gone is gone. It's not like S-Log where you can pull the highlights and recover the highlights a bit. This is the image we have to work with. So I'll show you a few things that you can do to kind of tweak it and still give it a stylistic look. So let's start by dropping our adjustment layer on top. All three of these clips are the same video clip. I just cut it up, so all the settings will be the same. Let's start by seeing what we can do with the shadows without introducing too much noise into the clip. So first step, we're gonna click on our clip and get this dialed in first so we have a really good base to build out our adjustment layer on. So let's get our white balance dialed in. Looks a little warm. I'm just kind of looking at this area here to get this dialed in. Pull that warmth out of there a bit. Bring our shadows up. And pump a little bit of contrast in. This will hopefully help our highlights to pop a bit. All right, already looking good. We'll bump up our saturation a little bit to get this red to pop, and then our bartender in the back becomes a little bit too saturated, so we'll go down to our curves. The light on her is mostly orange, so I think we can grab our orange and isolate it pretty well and just kind of pull this down a little bit. The main goal is to try and keep this red looking really good, the red on the drink. So we'll kind of bring these down. Nice. So next up, I want to introduce a little bit of kind of green, like a yellowish green into the shot here. So we'll kind of pull this over towards green a little bit. Since this is 1080p footage, I'm going to go ahead and set the sharpening to 25%. Go over to the curves, kind of dial this in a bit, really make that ice in the middle of the drink pop. We'll go ahead and add a vignette so we can really focus in on the drink being made in the middle here. I think what we need to is to add some warmth into our shadows a little bit. So come over here, add some warmth. So you can see here, I got a little carried away and I did the entire grade on just this clip. if you get to this point, you don't want to redo the entire grade on the adjustment layer. All you need to do is come over here to the effect controls. While having the clip selected, come down to Lumetri and cut that, and then we can just drop it onto our adjustment layer. It works in this case because all these shots are shot with the exact same settings. But if you had different clips in different scenarios, you can do this and use that as a base to kind of backtrack and preserve the look on the adjustment layer. And then you can kind of remove layers and correct the clip underneath from there. But it just saves you from having to redo all of the work again. Moving on to our final set of clips, we've got this one sent in by Ben. This is also shot on the Sony a7 III in 1080p at 60 frames per second, and it's shot in 8-bit 420. So once again, 8 bits, we don't have a ton to work with, but this is shot in the HLG3 picture profile, which is probably the best picture profile on the a7 III because it offers a lot of flexibility as far as color grading while still retaining a lot of information in the shadows and the highlights. So let's jump into this grade. We'll go ahead and grab an adjustment layer, slap it on top. So these 4 clips I've got all are shot in the exact same lighting and same looking kind of white balance. So we'll go ahead on this first clip, we'll go into our adjustment layer. We'll bring this to a more realistic place, and then we'll go into the clip and start dialing in some of the clip specific settings. So let's bring our exposure up a bit. Add some contrast, get it to a pretty good spot. Add some saturation. We'll leave the adjustment layer there for now, go into our clip, and then we'll start adjusting some of this. I really want to make this daylight coming in from the side appear as though it's white. So I'm just kind of looking on the ground here. Now we'll jump back into our adjustment layer. We'll go into the curves and start dialing in more of the look that we want. I love the bike, but I don't love the color of the yellow. So I want to make it warmer and make it feel a little bit more nostalgic. So we'll jump down here to our hue versus hue and grab the little eyedropper and grab this yellow part here. And then we'll add a couple more points. And we can kind of dial this in, and we can make the bike whatever color we want. So there's our before and after. Next up, I want to grab these blues and kind of make them a little bit more teal. I'm gonna go into our hue versus luma here, and under our blue, I'm gonna make it a little bit darker. That looks pretty good there. So here's our before and after, looking good. This is also shot in 1080p, so let's go under our sharpen. We'll bring this up to 25%. And then I think I want to push some blue into our shadows a little bit. And kind of dial this back. I'm gonna leave our highlights alone because I like how they look right now. This is a very cinematic looking sequence, so let's go ahead and drop a letterbox on here. We'll go over to effects and search for crop. Grab our crop, drop it on there. Go over to our effect controls, make sure our adjustment layer is selected, and we'll set our crop to 12% on the top and 12% on the bottom. And now we can move on to these other shots where we can dial in mostly just the white balance and make it look good. And a little bit of exposure. We can bring our highlights down a little bit. His hand's looking a little hot there. Cool this off a little bit. All right, so in this shot, I don't know if it'll come through in the YouTube compression, but when I play it back, there's quite a bit of artifacting right here. I don't know if you can see that. So what we're gonna do is grab our adjustment layer, drag it up a notch. We're gonna drop some film grain on there. I've got some 35mm medium film grain from Ezra Cohen. And we'll drop that onto our entire sequence, since I'm assuming all of these clips will need it. We'll click on our film grain clip and go down to the blend mode, and we'll set this to overlay. This will kind of hide some of that artifacting that was happening. It's not amazing, but it looks better than not having it at all. It kind of helps hide a little bit of the artifacting. So let's take a look at this sequence. So that concludes this first episode, I guess, of me color grading your video clips. I had a really good time. It was actually quite insightful for myself because I was able to take a look at some clips for the first time that I had never seen and kind of assess where they are and what I can do to them and how I can make them look the way I want them to look. If you learned something, I would love if you would drop a like down below and leave a comment if you had any questions or if you had any suggestions to make them look better than even what I could do to them. So as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to be posting a lot more content here soon. I've got quite a few things lined up and ready to roll that I'm going to be shooting in the next few weeks here. So I would love to have you along for the ride. I think this channel is going places and I want you to be a part of that. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.